This is an extract from the Leader podcast by the Evening Standard, hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for us on your podcast provider. Imagine enjoying the freedom of a beach in Spain after months of coronavirus lockdown, only to discover that when you get home, you're going straight back into quarantine. That's what's happened to thousands after the UK's snap decision ordering travellers returning from there to isolate for 14 days. There's been a lot of criticism over the speed of the decision and apparently confusing advice from the government, with Senior Minister Helen Whately telling people to look very carefully before going abroad. But our editorial column says Downing Street was right to act quickly.
There will be ups and downs in dealing with coronavirus, and this is a long-haul situation. The fast rising number of new cases reported in Spain late last week mean that without action, there would be a risk of holidaymakers bringing new infections back home. Talk of giving longer notice, or as Labour has vaguely done, of finding an alternative, such as airport temperature tests, to protect the public, is misguided. The former would simply risk possibly infected people rushing home early to beat a deadline, while the second would allow symptomless returnees, who might later turn out to have coronavirus, to spread the disease. The fight against coronavirus is far from over, and the Spanish quarantine should remind everyone that vigilance remains essential.
Well, one of those caught up in all of this is the Evening Standard's very own Amira Hashish, who was about to head home from Ibiza when the announcement came through. Amira, where were you and what were you doing when you heard the news?
Indeed, yeah. I was in Ibiza with a very good friend of mine. We'd had a relaxing couple of days, and we'd had a bite to eat, a late lunch, and we actually were doing some shopping. And I received a message from my friend saying, "Have you seen breaking news? You're going to have to quarantine upon return from Ibiza," which is, it's not the message that you hope for, just as you feel like you're chilling out after a tough few months of isolating. You're told that you go away for a few days and you come back and you're going to have to isolate again. So yeah, it wasn't what I hoped for.
Yeah, so here you are, a journalist taking a break from the news, and then suddenly you are one small part of a really big story. It must have been, I mean, were you annoyed or were you just disappointed? How did you feel?
I think it was just a stark reminder that we are living in these really unusual and quite turbulent times, and that the minute that you start to feel like you can take a step back and relax a bit, you actually can't, because you don't know what's going to be around the corner. And you're right, you know, as a journalist, you sort of feel like you're constantly on the cusp of this breaking news, but it's weird when it really starts to impact your personal life, and I think that's something that we're all experiencing in different ways. And of course, after that first message came in, I was then bombarded with lots of other WhatsApps from friends saying, "Are you still in Ibiza? When are you due to come back?" And of course, at that point, it was too late, because my flight coincided with the exact time, which would mean that I was going to have to quarantine.
That must have been an interesting flight. I bet everybody on that plane was very happy.
You know what? I think there was almost a sense of relief that we were on the plane and that it took off, because the other thing that people kept messaging me about was, you know, what if you get stuck there? What if these planes are cancelled? So, you know, there's all sorts of other panic, but yeah, I think it was a little bit of relief, and it was a late flight, so people were just trying to sleep their way through it, I think.
Well, you are back at work now, socially distanced, isolated, going nowhere near the office. Amira, what is the latest position on travel? Can we go on holiday?
Well, it's all rather confusing, isn't it? So if we take Ibiza as an example, or the Balearics, you know, what they're saying now at the FCO is that we are allowed to travel to the Balearic Islands, such as Mallorca and Ibiza. So it's actually just mainland Spain that they're advising against all non-essential travel to. However, anyone arriving from any part of Spain, including its islands, must quarantine. So it just feels like a bit of mixed messaging. And I do think that, you know, the Foreign Office is having to make this up on the spot, much like a lot of what we've experienced during COVID. But there's also there are a lot of talks apparently going on behind the scenes. So our latest article says that Spain's tourism minister has urged the UK to lift its quarantine rules on the Balearic and Canary Islands, and that might happen as early as today. It might not. So again, we're all kind of on tenterhooks, having to tune into the latest and to respond accordingly. But yeah, I think it is a personal choice, you know, and what I've learned is that there are consequences, and I think we're all trying to resume a bit more normality in various aspects of our life, and you do have to take into consideration your personal circumstances. And you know what, travel for me is a kind of a really important aspect of my life. I find travel really healing, and so I think a lot of people would you know, that you need to do what you need to do, but there are guidelines that could get in the way, and they could change quite literally overnight, as happened in my case.